When I was a kid, I lived a few blocks away from my aunt's house. Since it was in walking distance, it wasn't uncommon for me to walk there on the weekends to visit my cousins. They were both girls and a little bit younger than myself, and even though I was older and a boy, we still got along pretty well. Typically on weekends we'd just hang out and watch cartoons, or maybe raid the cupboard for some cereal. They always seemed to have better stuff than what my mom bought. The younger of the two was the quieter one. She really didn't seem to have a lot of friends, unless you count the imaginary one she always seemed to talk to. At least that's what I always chalked this up to. You see, it really wasn't uncommon for her to go upstairs to the attic and sit up there by herself. I never really gave it that much thought. I figured that was just a normal part of adolescence, to have an imaginary friend, or maybe to have periods where you like solitude and just being by yourself. But every time she came down from the attic, she always insisted, and she sounded completely sincere when she said this, that she had been spending time up there with her friend. I'd always ask her about her friend and inquire what her name was, but I'd never really get a straight answer. She'd just get super shy and then keep completely silent. Again, I always just chalked this up to one of those imaginary friend things. I mean, even I had an imaginary friend at one point, but it was something I got over pretty quickly. But as time went on, instead of getting better about this imaginary friend of hers, things actually got progressively worse. What I mean by that is, she didn't seem to get over it. Instead, she started to talk more and more about her imaginary friend. After a while, she even started describing what she looked like. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the dress that she wore, things like that. Considering how young she was at the time, I thought she had quite an incredible imagination, because her description of this girl was very specific, and it never really changed. It was always consistent. Always the same hair, the same eyes, the same clothing, every single time. It almost became a running joke between my brothers and I. We even started teasing her about it, asking her when she was going to start getting over her imaginary friend and move on with life. In retrospect, yeah, it seemed kind of mean, but honestly, the stories that she kept sharing started to become tiresome. It was almost annoying. Maybe I was being a bit harsh back then. By the time I was 10 years old, we had moved to a different house, and as such, we didn't visit my cousins as much anymore. And when we did, I never brought up the imaginary friend with my cousin. I never made any mention of it. To be honest, she stopped talking about it too, but I think that was only because we used to tease her so badly about it. By the time I was in my early 20s, my aunt had moved out of that house and into a different one. And since the place was for rent, and I had a lot of fond memories there, I decided to move in. I want to say I had only been in there for maybe a few weeks, when I started hearing banging noises coming from the attic. This wasn't something that bothered me that much, and I really wasn't that concerned about it. It really wasn't uncommon for things like squirrels or other animals to get inside people's attics. I always figured that's what it was, so I never really did much investigating, unless you count going up there to put down traps or things like that. Otherwise, I really never spent much time in there after I'd moved in. As time went on, and I got more used to the place, it actually got easier to ignore the noises. But the weird thing is, it seemed like the more I tried to ignore them, the louder and more obnoxious they became. Every few weeks I found myself going up into the attic to take out the traps, and to be honest with you, I could probably count on one hand the amount of times the traps actually caught something. Eventually I did find out where the animals were getting in from, and I was able to patch the holes and block them off. I kind of figured that would be the end of it, but within the following weeks after I first patched a hole up there, the noises started up again. One night after work I was laying in bed, and I started to hear the banging noises again. I figured I should call an exterminator in the morning, so I grabbed the nearby phone book and circled one of the numbers. I tore the page out of the phone book and stuck it under my phone, so that way I'd remember to call them in the morning. By the time I had laid back down in bed, I noticed that the noise coming from the attic had changed. This time, it sounded like footsteps. Not full-grown footsteps, but these were more childlike. That's the best way I can describe it, I guess. Very small and very delicate, but very obvious. They sounded just like a child running across the floor, struggling to regain their balance, like the way a toddler runs just after they learn how to walk. At this point, I figured it was just a larger animal, like maybe a raccoon or something. But again, this didn't really sound like an animal. After a few more minutes of this, the footsteps sounded more frantic, more hurried. They went from what sounded like walking to what sounded like skipping, and after a few minutes of that, they started to sound like running. A few moments later, I heard a crashing noise coming from the attic. I quickly opened the attic door, flipped on the light switch, and made my climb up the stairs. By the time I could see over the top stair, I saw what the crashing noise was. Something had knocked over a box of Christmas tree ornaments, and the bulbs had shattered all over the floor, leaving glass everywhere. Again, I was thinking an animal had done this, and as I said, I had already planned to call an exterminator in the morning. I went back downstairs to grab a broom and dustpan, and then made my way back upstairs to clean up the mess. As I began sweeping the glass up, something in one of the dark corners of the attic caught my eye. It was almost like a faint blinking light, flickering on and off, over and over again. It started out as one light, and then it was two lights. They glowed kind of strangely, kind of like how a cat's eyes would glow when you shine a light on them. I finished sweeping up the glass and went back downstairs to grab a flashlight. I made my way back up the stairs, and when I shined my light into the corner where I saw the flashing light coming from, I could finally see what was making the light. There in the corner of the attic was a doll. As I approached it, I noticed that the eyes looked like they were blinking. This freaked me out a little bit, but I still decided to pick the doll up and have a closer look. When I picked the doll up and stood it upright, both the eyes opened up. And when I tilted the doll as if laying it down, both the eyes closed. I had seen these types of dolls when I was a kid. They were the kind that were supposed to look like they were sleeping when you laid them down, and awake when you stood them up. I kind of chuckled about this for a moment, because when I looked at the way the doll was dressed, as well as the eye color and hair color, I noticed that this exactly matched what my cousin had described when she talked about her friend in the attic. I figured that was it. Mystery solved. And again, I had a good laugh about it. I placed the doll back down in the corner and made my way down the stairs, shutting off the light and closing the attic door. Before I'd even taken one step away from the door, I heard something behind me. It was very faint, but very distinct, like a giggle, or a laugh, a child's laugh, coming from just behind the attic door. I don't know why I did this, but I slowly opened the door back up, and when I looked up at the top of the stairs, I saw it. Two small blinking lights, just like the ones I saw in the corner of the attic where the doll was. Only this time, they were at the top of the stairs, in complete darkness, looking down at me. I quickly slammed and then locked the door, vowing to myself never to open that door up again under any circumstance, and to never go anywhere near that attic. I stayed at that house for maybe another 6 months before moving out, and every night during those 6 months, That banging noise continued. Whenever friends would come over and they'd ask me what was upstairs, I'd always tell them it was storage. And whenever they asked about those banging noises coming from the attic, my reply was always the same. I really need to call an exterminator.